Good morning, everyone. All right. Good to see all of you guys. Happy Resurrection Day. You know, it's funny, I have some folks sometimes that go, why do you say Resurrection Day? Well, Easter just reminds me of the stupid eggs for some reason. So, I don't think one's better than the other, so don't say, well, now I got to change from saying Happy Easter to Happy Resurrection. You don't have to do that. It's just for me, and I think for a lot of Christians, it has a bit more meaning than just the whole egg thing. So I think resurrection is a little bit more appropriate for us. Now, you might be saying, well, I got lured here this morning. I had made a promise to my family that I would show up, but I don't believe necessarily in the resurrection. You know what? And that's fine. That's perfectly fine. I think the reason that we don't believe in the resurrection is because we really don't know who God is. And I think once we know who God is, and we understand that He's outside of our time, He's outside of our power, He's outside of our understanding to His fullness, then we begin to realize He wouldn't be much of a God if He wasn't. We really wouldn't need Him if He had the same frailties and capabilities and limitations that we have. So this morning, I'm going to take a little bit different tact in the sense that I'm going to be talking about the Lord. I'm going to be talking about His name. And I'm going to be talking about what that name means, because I believe that if we completely, or at least move towards understanding what God's name is, I believe it makes it so much easier for us to believe that He's capable of doing absolutely anything that He desires to do. Have you ever noticed that people have a lot of names? People have quite a few different names. Take, for instance, Pastor Dan. His real name is Daniel, right? I don't know if I've ever heard his mom call him anything except for Daniel, mostly when she's mad at him. But his real name is Daniel. To most of his friends, he's Dan. If he was introducing himself, let's say, to a child, he would probably introduce himself as Mr. Esch. To many, he's just referred to as Pastor Dan. Now, people who are famous people like Pastor Dan, they often have several different names. Abraham Lincoln, for example, he had many names. He was Abe. He was Abraham. He was Honest Abe. He was also known as the Rail Splitter. Some even called him the Ancient One, believe it or not. He was called the Great Emancipator, and he was even at times called Father Abraham. Some of you guys might not recognize George Herman Ruth Jr., but he was known as the Babe. He was known as the Sultan of Swat, Babe Ruth, the Bambino, the Big Fellow, the Caliph of Clout, and the Home Run King. Names mean a lot. And one name doesn't always do it. I would venture to say we could pick out anyone in here this morning and ask what your name is. I bet you have at least two. I mean, not just first, middle, and last, but even your first name. People call you different things. And that's not even talking about the ones that are mentionable to people in good company. Those other names that you get called. But people who are larger than life often need more than one name to fully express who they are. So if that's true with presidents, if it's true with baseball players, if it's true with rock stars, how much more so for God? Wouldn't it stand to reason that God would have many names? In order to be able to get a glimpse of who God is, wouldn't it stand to reason that He would have quite a few different names? And in the Bible, we find that. In the Bible, we see that He's called many things, and in many times it describes His character, but it doesn't just describe His character. Sometimes it describes His nature. And sometimes it even describes how He interacts with you and me, or at least how he tries to react with mankind. There are simply no few words that can adequately tell us who he is or what he is all about. And I believe that's why so many of us miss him today. I don't know if you noticed, but a couple of the songs that Jesse picked out this morning was talking about God seeing us and us seeing him. You know, you can look without seeing. And I believe that today we're not looking for God. I believe we're looking for something fast. We're looking for something ready-made. We're looking for one name that describes God, but it's not possible. Many of us are just simply used to our culture, a culture where everything is immediate. The culture of wiki, whichever you want to call it. The culture of the internet. And of course, everything we read on the internet is true, right? You can go in and do your research and you can find out a whole bunch of stuff in short order. Whereas you used to have encyclopedias or other kinds of books where you had to go look things up, but at least they were somewhat true. You have to be careful what you look up now. But we are looking for a God that's simple. We're looking for a God that's easy. We're actually looking for a God that can be powerful when we want him to be powerful, but very, very complacent when we don't want him or where we don't need him. A God that will do what we want him to do, much like the genie in the bottle or in the magic lamp. You know, we want the kind of God that we can say some magic word and it'll pop out of the bottle or out of the lamp. We can say, hey, I need a wish. I wish you'd take this away. I wish you'd take my cancer away. I wish you'd heal my mom. I wish you'd do this for me. I wish you would do all of these things. And then we put him back in the bottle and say, but I don't want you messing up my Friday night. I don't want you messing up my Saturday night. I don't want you to change my language. I don't want you to change my personality. I don't want you to change the people I run around with or the things that I do or my habits. I just want you to be there when I need you there. Not any other time. Don't mess around. And I think sometimes even with Christians, we're also still looking for that quick fix. We approach the Bible like this: Lord, what do you want me to read today? Okay, must be here. We read a couple verses and go, I don't get that. Bible doesn't speak to me like it does everybody else. It must be man-made. It must just be man put together because, it just doesn't do it for me. And yet, if you fall in love, don't you take the time to get to know that person? I mean, come on, guys. When you fell in love, hopefully you're still in love if you're married, but when you fell in love, you became somebody other than who you were. You actually talked on the phone. Guys, traditionally, don't like to talk on the phone much. It's like, hi, how you doing? I love you. I told you that when we got married. I still love you. Don't bother me today. I'm busy. Right? It's kind of the way we operate, right? But not during courtship. During courtship, hi, how you doing? Oh, it's good to talk to you. You just dropped her off 10 minutes ago. Right? Hi, how you doing? I miss you. I've only seen you, it's 5 minutes, but I miss you. Tell me all about you. I want to know all about you. I want to know about your childhood. I want to know about your life. I want to know about I just want to know everything about you because you care about that person. You want to know every last detail about them. But when it comes to God, we don't really want to know him. We don't really want to know him. In fact, so many times you ask people certain basic questions about God, and they really don't know him. They don't know him. For instance, God helps those who help themselves. If I ask for a show of hands of how many of you thought that was in the Bible, I might get a few hands. It's not. It's not. God loves homosexuality. Not in the Bible. He loves the sinner, no matter what the sin is. But when we come to know Christ, we don't just come in with all of our baggage and say, God, you got to accept it. Like the world does, because the world will accept anything, won't they? You got to accept me. You got to just accept everything else. He goes, no, I'll accept you for who you are. But just be prepared. I might change you. Amen. I might make you into someone better. Yes. I might make you into someone that you've really always secretly wanted to be. And that may mean laying a few things down. So this morning, we're only going to have time to look at a few of the names of God. But it's my prayer that some will hear it and understand it, and they will see God. Because you know what, guys? That is the meaning of being born again. How many times can you drive by someplace and say, look at that? And your spouse goes, it's been there for 5 years. Well, I never saw it. Or you're watching a show that you and your wife have watched, or you and your brothers have watched, or whatever you've said. You're watching a show. You've watched this show for the whole first season, and all of a sudden you go, look at that, I've never seen them before. And they were in the whole first season. Right? We can look and not see. We can listen and not hear. I find myself asking my wife a lot of times, what did you say? You know, I catch the first few words and then I'm gone. I hear the first part of it, but then I drift. And I have to remind myself, pay attention. You know, pay attention. I need to pay attention. That way I'm not always asking, what did you say? So, as we get into this, and like I said, there's only going to be a few names of God we're going to take a look at this morning. But I want you to know that the Bible is composed, especially those of you that are visiting, maybe haven't been in church in a while. I want you to know that the Bible is composed of 66 books written over thousands of years by dozens of authors. Okay? Now, this is significant. This is really important. And these names that are given to the Lord are spread out over all of those books, all of those years, and by all of those authors. Coincidence? I don't believe with the Lord that there are any such things as coincidences. You see, that's what really happens when you see God. You begin to realize there's no such thing as a coincidence. If He's really God, if He's really in charge, if He's really on the throne, if He's still active and alive, then there are no such things as chance. They're all in the hands of God. Pray with me. Father, we ask this morning that You might give us new hearts. We become so calloused. We become so selfish and so arrogant. We think that we know everything. We think we got all the answers. And it's like the ant on the anthill shaking its fist at a human being. I know all things. In His world, maybe. But in the scheme of things, very, very small. So, Lord, as we take a look at who You really are this morning, I pray that You'd humble us. Give us a right vision of ourselves and where we fit into this awesome thing that You call Your creation. We love You, Lord, and we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Look at Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, in the original language, the wasn't there. It just says in beginning. And then you see the next word. That word is Elohim. Elohim. It's translated as God. In the beginning, God, or in beginning, God. Now, if you stop right there, I want you to know and understand, this is the first book of the Bible. It doesn't apologize. It just says, in beginning, God. God. God was there. He has been there. He's always been there. He will always be there. The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. In the beginning, God, Elohim. Now, it's interesting because this word Elohim and the way that it is used right here in this verse, it means, and I quote, plural of majesty, plural of honor, and plural of fullness. Okay, It's important that you file away plural, because we're going to come back to that. Plural in majesty, in honor, and in fullness. What this means is that he is God in the fullest sense of the word. He is God, capital G, of gods, little g. Amen. The Old Testament, a lot of life in general has been full of the worship of little gods. People seem to always have to have something to worship. As Bob Dylan said years ago, you're going to have to love somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're going to worship someone. Someone is going to be your God. And in our life and in our world, most of it is self. Wouldn't you agree? We all love ourselves. Even people would say, well, I have bad self-esteem. Well, then quit thinking about yourself. You know, isn't bad self-esteem just esteem in the opposite, mixed up, perverted, worldly way? I mean, the quickest way to have good self-esteem is just don't think about yourself. Think about other people. But it's important, guys. There are many gods when this was written. There have been many gods. There are many gods. But the Bible makes it very, very clear there is one God. And that God is Elohim, the God of gods, the creator of all things, which brings us to the next statement. You notice it says in the beginning, God created. He's a creator. He's not just God of gods. He is the creator. It is the word bara. Thumb over to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 28. Isaiah 40, 28. You might say, well, I don't believe in creation. That's okay. God will be fine without that. In other words, my point is this. It doesn't matter what you and I believe. God's still God. It's not going to change him at all. It doesn't change him at all, but it changes us. What we believe changes us. The Bible says that he is the creator of all things. And Isaiah 40, 28 says, have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, he neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. His understanding is unsearchable. Now, I don't have this written down on my notes, but I remember in my study, he's also known as El Roi. El Roi. You know what that means? It means the God that sees. I forget, there was a movie out not long ago, but it said, see me. Or they would say, I see you. That's a lot different than, oh yeah, I see. That's a lot different than just a passing glance. It means you've looked into the soul of the individual and you know them. I see you. I see my wife. I know who she is. We've been together a very, very long time, and she sees me. I think that's sometimes why husbands and wives fight, because we see each other for who we really are. The good, the bad, and the ugly. We see each other. He is a God who sees. Now, I don't know about you. On one hand, you might say, well, that kind of freaks me out a little bit. That God sees me all the time. He sees me 24/7. He doesn't see my persona. He doesn't see my rock star image. He doesn't see all that I try to have people see about me. Like Facebook, isn't it? Yeah, I get started. You go into Facebook and you see these pictures and they're like 20 years old. And then you see the person, you're going, oh my gosh, what happened to you? You know, they pick out the absolute best picture of the last 35 or 40 years and they put it. We do that. Do we not do that? by clothes, by masks, by presentation, whatever it is, the name that we choose to use when we introduce ourselves to someone. We always pick the cool one, right? We pick the most awesome name because whatever impression we want to give to that person, that's the name that we pick for them. But if you're a Christian, you give your life to Jesus Christ, there's great comfort in knowing that God sees me. Because I don't ever have to go to him and explain. I don't ever have to apologize for the tears or the worry or the concern. I don't have to apologize for any of that because he sees me. He knows me. He knows my heart. Many people go through their entire life without ever having someone who sees them, who really gets to know them. Now, I also want to have you turn to John 1. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, New Testament. John 1, verses 1 through 3. We talked about Elohim. We talked about Bara. We talked about him being the only God. We talked about him creating, being the creator of the universe. But I want you to notice something all the way over here in the New Testament. John puts Jesus and God together. And he puts him together in the beginning at Genesis. Now, take a look at John 1, verses 1 through 3. It says, in the beginning, it sounds a lot like Genesis, doesn't it? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, folks who have been here, you've heard me say this many times, but they're visitors, and I want to explain. The Word, you see that? In the beginning was the Word. You notice how it's capitalized? There's a reason for that. The word is logos. It's the Greek word logos. Now, one of the simplest ways I know to bring this down is, it's from where we get our word logo. If you see the logo for Pepsi, you know what's Pepsi, right? If you see the logo for maybe your Apple, let's take Apple. You see the thing with the bite out of the, that's kind of freaky anyway, bite out of the side of the apple, right? You know exactly what that is. You know what that company is. You know what that company does. Jesus is the logo of God. He is the logos of God. He is the expression of God in the flesh. Now, what he's saying, John is saying, in the beginning, Jesus was there. In the beginning was the logos. And the logos was with God, and the logos was God. Back to Elohim, the plurality of God. The plurality of God. He was in the beginning with God, and look at verse 3. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. Jesus wasn't an afterthought. Jesus wasn't just somebody that come along in the New Testament so many years later. He was there at the beginning. So whether we want to admit it or not, there is one true God. And we are not him. You're not him. I'm not him. Had someone one day say, he said, there's only one Messiah suit, and it doesn't fit anybody but him. One Jesus Christ. So we may want to ignore the fact that there's one God. We may want to ignore the fact that he's the creator of the universe. We may want to ignore the fact that he sees absolutely everything, but it doesn't change anything. He misses absolutely nothing. I want to give you another name for God. It's translated as the Ancient of Days. It's Atik Yomin. If you will look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. Atik Yomin. Daniel has this vision of God, this vision of heaven. And if you go into, we don't have time this morning, but you go into the book of Revelation, you'll see a parallel going on here. But with Daniel, he says, I watched till thrones were put in place. Daniel 7:9. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair on his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame. Its wheels were burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Ruh-roh. What books? Well, remember, he sees everything. You know, we're not judged for being sinners. You realize that? We're not judged for being sinners because we're all sinners. We will never be judged because we sin. We will be judged because we didn't accept God's provision to cancel out that sin. Romans says that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. James tells us that if we commit one of the sins, we're guilty of breaking them all. Because if you break one, how can you break one sin without being I heard someone tell me, well, I don't believe in that anymore. I believe that Jesus came and he saved us, and we're not sinners anymore. And I said, well, do you sin? He goes, yeah, I know. Well, then explain to me how in the world you can sin and not be a sinner. I don't get that. You know, you must have some math I don't understand. So basically, the Bible is telling us we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But when this judgment, when he opens the books, you know what this is going to be? The first judgment, or one of the judgments, let me reclassify that, not the first judgment, but one of the judgments is going to be, what did you do with Jesus? I made him plain. All you had to do was see. All you had to do was look. I made him there. I gave him to you. What did you do with him? And if we say we did nothing with him, we didn't believe in him, we didn't want anything to do with him, that's going to be one path. And for Christians, even Christians are going to have to stand before the Lord and give an answer for what they've done in Jesus. There's going to be rewards. There's going to be some weeping because of all the time that's been wasted. Got this picture. Let me get back to the Ancient of Days. Sees it all. We've seen him in all of those classifications. Michelangelo's painting in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is known as the creation of Adam. You guys have seen it where they do a little touch thing, and you know, right? You've seen it. Okay. It was most likely inspired by what I just read to you out of Daniel. A lot of things have been inspired from that. But the sad part of it is even some of our cartoons of our day, they've weakened the image of the Lord. And they portray him, as a robed, graying old man sitting on a throne, feeble, sometimes even leaning on a cane. But that's not who he is. That's not what this meant. This is not the meaning of what Daniel saw. God is ageless and timeless. God is perfectly wise. What do I mean ageless, timeless, perfectly wise? He doesn't age. If he's the Alpha and the Omega and he's been around for eternity, what advantage is there to age? Can he even age? Now, as I get older, I get weaker. It's harder to get in and out of places. It's harder to do things. I hate to admit that to you, but that's true. You get up in the morning and you're like, whoa, what happened in the middle of the night? Somebody come in and beat me. You know? Age. It's not so with God. Always, always strong, ageless, timeless. He is perfectly wise. What does it mean to be perfectly wise? I think everybody in here, probably every single person, you've been wise in an instant at least once. Right? At least once, maybe twice, maybe half a dozen different times. It's easy to be wise in an instant. They say the difference between a hero and a coward is a split second. Trying to decide whether to run or stand and fight, and they wait too long and they have to fight. and they become a hero. It's easy to be wise in a minute, but how about perfectly wise? Perfect wisdom that makes the right decision every single time. Perfectly wise. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm going to have a counselor, that's the one I want. That's the one I want. I want the counselor that's perfectly wise. A guy that knows everything and gives me the right answer every single time I ask him. And yet, who do we have as counselors? Our drinking buddies? Our dope buddies? Hey, man, what do you think about that? I don't know, I'm hungry. Let's get something to eat. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times you look at drunks. You know, they go to the bar and they sit there, and who do they talk to? Other drunks. Trying to find solutions to their family. You know, that's the blind leading the blind. I want a God that knows everything. The white robe, the hair, it symbolizes purity. The throne shows his power and his authority. And we even see him as judge as these books are open. I need to speed up here a little bit. Let me give you one out of Galatians chapter 4. Galatians chapter 4, verse 1 through 7. To me, this is probably one of the sweetest names of all of God. Just the sweetest names of God. It is Abba. Abba. Look at Galatians 4, verses 1 through 7. It says, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, though he is master at all." So let me set this up a little bit. You're a millionaire, you're a multimillionaire, you're a billionaire, but you have a child, and that child is 5. If something happens to you, you do not want to put those billions in the hands of a 5-year-old, right? He'll probably stuff them down his pants and you never see the money anymore, you know, or flush them down the toilet. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what they're worth, and he doesn't care. Well, they would have their children under tutelage for quite some time. And while that child was little, he was not much different than the household slaves that they had at the time. He didn't really have a whole lot of rights because he was under the care of everybody else. Even though technically he is the master. Because when dad's gone, he's going to be the master. He's going to be the master of all. Look at verse 2 there. "But he is under guardians and stewards until the appointed time by the Father. Even so, we, when we were children, we were in bondage under the elements of this world." You know what that means? We don't see. We're a little bit like the child. We don't see like God sees. We don't have this full scope of vision. You know the old joke about mom having eyes in the back of her head? Well, God's got them everywhere. He sees it all. And we're a lot like children. We want to run our own lives, but to be honest with you, many of us are not capable of it. I mean, stop and look at the crime today. Take a look at the people who are addicted in one way or another. You take a look at the world, you take a look at society. Are we really mature enough to handle even our own lives? The statistics don't bear it out. The statistics don't bear it out. So it's saying we were under the bondage of the elements of this world. But it says, when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth who? His Son. That's none other than Jesus Christ. When the fullness of time had come, when God said that it was time, he sent forth Jesus Christ, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. Now, what's the whole law adoption thing? Doing anything by the law is a real drag. I'm just telling you. If I have to do something, something inside of me says, I'm not going to do it. My mom used to tell me it was because I was from Missouri, and that's the way Missouri people are. But it's more than that. It's just a rebellion in my heart. If I'm told I have to do something, I don't want to do it. I want to do it because I want to do it. Does that make sense? To go to church because I have to, that's horrible. I don't blame anyone for not going to church just because they have to. If I've got to read God's word just because I have to, I won't do it. I'll do it for a little while, and then I'll quit doing it. If I have to love someone, it's not going to be there. You see, God never intended us to live by the law. God never wanted us to be on the have-tos. He never wanted us to see him as something that was hanging over our head as though we could never reach it. That's why he sent Jesus. He sent Jesus to say, that's not who God is. I'm the expression of who God is, full of mercy and grace and kindness and love. Are there some guidelines? Yes, but they're good ones. Why is it that we think guidelines are a bad thing? You don't just turn your kid loose and let him do whatever. Well, some do. But I mean, for the most part, you just don't say, hey, we're going to go to town today. There's going to be a lot of intersections and buses and taxis. Just go for it. Whatever you want to do, just go for it. If you want to run out in front of them, it's okay. I don't mind. Because I don't want to restrict your freedom, you know. I don't want you to grow up being weird because of all of my hang-ups. I want you to be free, so you just go out and be free. You know how long it's going to last? Not very long. Not very long. Why is it that our common sense tells us that with our kids, they need guidance? But when it comes to God, we don't want him to give us any at all. Why? Because I'm God. And I'm smarter than him. And I know what's best for my life. So he sent to redeem us so that we're not under the law anymore. We're his kids. We're his sons. We're his daughters. And it says in verse 6, and because you are his sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts. That's called the Holy Spirit. But look what it says. Crying what? Abba, Father. Do you realize that word Abba, a better translation is Daddy? Actually, Dada. Dada. Wow. He is the Father of all creation. It says, you're no longer a slave, but you're a son. And if you're a son, then you're an heir of God through Jesus Christ. Now, he's the Father of all creation, which means we're part of his creation. Therefore, he is your Father. Even though you might not acknowledge it, he is your Father. However, we can have a father and never know him. Many of you sitting here this morning, you're like me. I never really knew my father. I never sat down with him. I never asked him about his life. I never knew his brothers or his sisters or his aunts or his uncles. I never knew what he was like as a teenager. And I never knew what life was like for him. You know what? I never knew because I never asked. When it came to my father, my heart and my eyes were closed. But yet where God is concerned, I've got to ask, are our eyes closed this morning when it comes to God? Have we shut them and we're comfortable with keeping them shut? Romans 1:20 says, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Even his eternal power and his Godhead, so that we are without excuse. You know what that means? You got to just look around. Those sunsets aren't an accident. Those beautiful pine trees are not an accident. The beauty of the sun coming up in the morning, that's not an accident. And if we're sitting here this morning and we're thinking, I don't believe all that, I'm a self-made individual. Again, I'll ask you what I've asked our people so many times. I have a challenge for you. Take a big breath of air, and I'm going to time you and see how long you can keep it. I bet you can't keep it for 5 minutes. That's how much power you have. You have about 5 minutes of power, because after that, you have to breathe. We don't control our lives. We don't have the power over our lives. But you know what? All we've got to do is look around. God is all around us in absolutely everything, but we got to open them. Not just physically, but we got to open them. My dad was an imperfect man, and now he's gone. I can never ask him any of those questions. I can never really see my dad. But the one and only true God, our Father, is visible all around us. So guys, I'm begging you this morning, don't just open your eyes physically, but open them. Open your heart. You know, we can have sight and still be blind. Okay, back to this Abba thing. There's many words to describe Father. Dad, Pops, Daddy-O, the old man. Right? And probably a whole bunch more. But Father is a little bit more formal. I could not call my dad Father. I wouldn't call him Dad. I wouldn't call him Father because of so much disrespect that I had for him. But this word Abba, better translated as Dada, that comes from a very, very sweet, intimate, loving, trusting relationship from a child to their daddy. It is likely the most wonderful sounds that a daddy can ever hear. I remember when my boys were little, the first time they would say Dad or Dada, it was like, wow. You know, the first time my grandchildren say Papa to me, it's like, okay, what do you want? Let me get my wallet out. It's just precious. It's sweet. It's intimate. And again, like I say, probably one of the sweetest sounds we'll ever hear. However, over the spread of the life of a child, a father's name goes from Dada to the old man. And sometimes it never comes back. From Dada, that sweet, wonderful, close relationship, to the old man. For many of us this morning, God is just simply the old man. The man upstairs. That's all he is. He's not the formal father with a capital F. He's not that sweet, intimate, loving, trusting relationship because it's gone. Or perhaps it was never there even in the first place. So how do you get it back? And I'm going to close with this. Here's the last name I'll be giving you this morning, and it's out of Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2. Isaiah 12, verse 2. You guys have heard the Lord Jesus referred to as Yeshua. This word is El Yashuati. You'll see it in Isaiah 12:2. It says, behold, God is my what? God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He has also become my salvation. Salvation, what do I need to be saved from? From yourself. From the arrogance, from the pride. Putting God back in the right place. Have you ever woken up in the morning and just said, why me? If you have, it's because you are in the throne. You are on the throne and God is not. That's what causes us to feel that way. But when God's on the throne, we don't wake up thinking, why me? We know that there's a plan. Okay, in the Old Testament, after 40 years of living in the desert, young Joshua I'm getting ahead of myself. You can tell I'm getting excited. Young Joshua was given the task of bringing the people from a place of death, there in the wilderness, there in the desert, a place of hardships, and he was given the task of bringing them into the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey. If they did what the Lord asked them to do, they would have peace and rest. How fitting that Joshua's name in Hebrew is Yeshua. Actually, his name is Yeshua is salvation. Joshua was responsible for saving his people. 14 centuries later, in the same part of the country, a baby was born, and guess what his name was? Joshua. His name was Joshua. Yeshua. Translated from the Greek, it becomes Jesus. Coincidence? Remember, with God, there is no such thing. Yeshua is still rescuing, and he's still saving people. People that are lost and they're hopeless, and they feel like there's no real reason to go on. In Matthew 11, 28 through 30, it says, "Come to me, all you who are labor are and heavy laden, and I will give you" what? Rest. Can you rest? When you lay down at night, can you rest? You know, there's a lot of people who can't rest at night. They're tossing and turning and worrying about everything in life. Come to me, you who labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light." By Isaiah calling the Lord El Yeshuati, he's reminding us of two extremely important truths. One, we are in desperate need of being rescued. You might say, "Well, I don't need salvation." Yes, you do. You just can't see it. I don't need being rescued. Yes, you do. You just can't see it. Ask God, if it's only your first prayer or your only prayer, ask God to give you his eyes. Ask God to open up your eyes so you can see who he truly is. And here's the second thing that he's pointing out. Only God has the qualifications to pull off salvation. No one else can do it. No one else can save us. So I'll close with this, guys. What's in a name? Everything. It changes who you believe, what you believe about God, and whether you believe that he even is God. Luke 9, 18 through 20, it says, "And it happened as he was alone praying that his disciples joined him, and he asked them, saying, 'Who do the crowds say that I am?' And they answered and said, 'Well, some are saying John the Baptist, some are saying Elijah, and others are saying you're one of the old prophets that's risen again.' And here's the key. He said to the disciples, he says, 'But who do you say that I am?' And Peter said, 'You are the Christ of God.'" Guys, who do you say Jesus is this morning?